I traveled to 3 other countries while abroad in London. One thing I learned is that just because you've managed to figure out how some things work in one of them doesn't mean it will go as smoothly in any of the others. My first trip outside the UK was to Dublin a few weeks into my stay. I went with a friend and we hadn't planned much of the trip except our travel and a hostel. We stepped off a bus after an all-night ride in Dublin at 6 a.m. before the sun rose with a few pounds and the address of our hostel on my iPod. We showed the address to a couple people, and they told us to take the Luas, which was a tram system, to the area of town where they thought it would be. We went outside the station and followed their directions to the nearest Luas stop. There was an automatic ticket machine, but it wouldn't accept our cards, and we hadn't withdrawn any euros yet. So we went to find an ATM. There was one convenience store nearby that had just opened. We popped in. Fortunately, there was an ATM there, but it hadn't been restocked in a while, so we could only get 50s. We took them back to the ticket machine and discovered that it wouldn't accept cash any bigger than a 20. So we trudged back to the convenience store and asked if they could break it. They said it was too early in the day to have enough cash to change out 50s. So I thought we could just buy a map there, get some change, and use the map to have a better idea of how to get to our hostel anyway. Guess who didn't sell maps? So there we were, pockets full of euros we couldn't spend, standing in the dark and out of options to get to our hostel. After a few minutes of ingenious thought, we decided to walk along the Luas tracks in the direction that we would have ridden it. We saw the city awake before us and the sun rise on the River Liffey to illuminate our hostel situated on the south bank of the river. Some weeks later, I went to visit a friend in Amsterdam. She was studying there, and while in class, I was on my own in the city. One afternoon, I set out to wander, and we arranged a time to meet up when she was done with school. I spent most of the day walking along the canals, popping into souvenir shops, a favorite activity when traveling, and checking on places I wanted to visit in the future. I saw the tulip market, perused a cheese museum, and watched street performers in the city center. About half an hour before we were going to meet, I started to get hungry. I saw an Albert Heijn across the road, recognized it as the same kind of grocery I had shopped with her in, and decided to go pick out some food. I thought it would be nice to bring us both something to eat so we wouldn't have to return to her apartment before seeing more sights. I browsed the store looking for the cheapest but still tasty snack I could find. I ended up getting a loaf of bread, some apple spread, and a Dutch version of Orangina. Or so I thought. I was not aware that anything in a vacuum-sealed bag meant that it had not been fully cooked. It said pre-baked on the package in the tiny, tiny English print, and I had so wrongly assumed that it was a bad translation of already baked. Half-baked would have been more appropriate, in my opinion. The surprisingly cheap tub of apple spread that I had purchased turned out to be less like apple butter that I had imagined, and more of a vaguely apple-scented, gelatinous molasses. I'm not sure what it would have been good with, but half-cooked bread was not its match. The Dutch Orangina was made by the infamous brand Euroshopper that would put great value to shame in the States. Instead of the wonderful light bubbly orange soda that I was expecting, I got a sort of carbonated, watered-down Sunny D mixed with tang. It was even worse than Orange Crush. But it was the perfect complement to the spectacular failure that was my first attempt to shop in Amsterdam. The last trip I took was to Paris. I traveled with a group from 3 different universities, 2 separate study abroad programs, and no French speakers except me. I had spent 4 grueling years in high school and a few additional terms in college studying French, so I took the opportunity to speak it every time I could. Before we got our days in Paris started, we would walk by a small bakery in the mornings and buy fresh breakfast and coffee. Mostly this bakery was the perfect place to arouse my French from its unused slumber. Food vocabulary had always been my favorite, unsurprisingly, and those words remained the easiest to remember. I ordered without a hitch until I met the chocolate donut. It was so delicious, and once I discovered it, it was the only petit déjeuner that would do. I ordered it routinely, but sadly never smoothly. The sign in the bakery counter just says donut, so I thought maybe it was a French word that we had adopted. I speculated on the French pronunciation. Je voudrais un donut au chocolat, s'il vous plaît, I ordered. You would like what? The woman behind the counter replied in French. Oh, donut, I kind of mumbled insecurely while gesturing the shape of a donut with my hand. Oh, donut, she said. Right. Well, whoops. Merci. I paid and left. The next morning, a different woman was working. Un donut au chocolat, s'il vous plaît. She called from the cash register to the worker behind the counter. Donut au chocolat. What? Did she say donut? She said donut. So on the third day, I didn't know what to say, so I ordered a mumble au chocolat. Quoi? She responded. We have beaucoup de chocolat. And she began to list off all of the pastries in the counter with chocolate, and I couldn't do anything but point. This one simple donut had reduced years of language study to point and s'il vous plaît.